Hey, everybody, welcome to the Sense of Things podcast. And Ron and myself are on today. Got a lot to talk about, more continuing economic and market activities. We'll cover a little bit about the economics going on and some of the things that happened this week. And then Ron's got some continued market things going on from his perspective of where the market's going. And we will start off our episode today by talking about a current event thing. And we started that last week and had a lot of fun with it. So we decided to go that way again. Ron, morning, sir.
Good morning. We're coming up against the precipice here with the debt ceiling. What do you want to kick us off with?
Oh,
talk about the debt ceiling for hours.
Yes, we could talk about that. But I thought what would be fun to start off, it's the end of the legislative session here in Texas and around the country. A lot of legislative sessions have ended. They've enacted a lot of new laws on the books, but it's amazing to me how laws don't get taken off the books and how they could have possibly gotten there to begin with.
Jeff, I got to interrupt you. Was one of these laws, are you guys succeeding from the union finally? I know those votes keep getting up higher and higher every year.
If you look at the Texas Constitution, we actually never did say that we were part of the United States to begin with. So we still consider ourselves a sovereign nation, and we're large enough and our economy is big enough to do that. But I thought, let me share this because I thought this was some interesting stuff for me, some interesting laws on the books that I was not aware that were out there. And let me just get to where I can see the actual sharing screen here. Okay. So one of these will pertain to your current location, because I think it's important for you to know this. Okay, as I was looking through these, I saw some common trends. One, Alabama, it is illegal to wear a fake mustache that causes laughter in church. And apparently mustaches are a problem because also in Indiana, mustaches are illegal if the bearer has a tendency to habitually kiss other humans. Now, I can't hear you.
I said, think about the rage that had to go on for them to actually pass this.
Once again, there had to have been an issue. This is important for you to know since you've moved out to Arizona permanently now. It is illegal for donkeys to sleep in bathtubs out there.
All right, I'll stop doing that then.
Yes, it doesn't say donkeys sleeping in beds, but just no bathtubs. No sleeping donkeys in bathtubs. So
all the rage back in the day, I guess.
Apparently that was an issue at some time. California, a frog that dies during a frog jumping contest cannot legally be eaten. I wasn't aware that we have done that past the time that Mark Twain was around.
Must have been our French friends.
Apparently, and you could go for the legs, you just can't do the rest of it. I thought this was good. This is a good law in the books. In Georgia, it's illegal to keep an ice cream cone in your back pocket on Sundays.
Just out of curiosity, did any of these come with specific fines or jail time?
No, there are a few that are in here. They do have very specifics. Florida was an interesting one. If an elephant is left tied to a parking meter, the parking fee to be paid is just as it would be for a regular vehicle. So there is no weight limit on what's tied to it. Coins, Hawaii, coins are not allowed to be placed in one's ears. My grandfather's little pull the coin out of your ear thing, it would have just totally ruined his whole day.
But you could fake pulling off your thumb.
So that is true, or pulling your finger or whatever, having somebody pull your finger. That's not an issue, apparently. Iowa, one-arm piano players must, by law, perform for free, which I thought this was very unfair, and we should strike that one from the books immediately.
Shouldn't they just charge 50% off?
It could be true. That's what I'm thinking. Kentucky, one may not dye a duckling blue and offer it for sale unless there are more than 6 are for sale at once. So
but isn't that known already?
I would think so. I would have thought it would be a law in the books everywhere. I thought this was a good law in my state of Texas. You cannot sell one's eye. So you can't sell your eye. I think that's probably a good rule. This one I still haven't figured out. Your old home of Pennsylvania, it's illegal to tell a fortune teller where to dig for a buried treasure. Shouldn't they already know?
Isn't that like clocked patient doctor privilege there? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking so. Rhode Island biting off someone's limb would result in 1 to 20 years in prison. I'm thinking that's probably a good rule.
That probably came out of some mafia hit or something.
Yes. Now, apparently Arizona and South Carolina, there was some things between them. Horses may not be kept in bathtubs in South Carolina. So apparently this is an issue with horses and donkeys.
Apparently.
I thought this was a law looking for a problem, which was in Washington state, the harassing of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and other undiscovered subspecies is a felony punishable by fine and or imprisonment. So don't mess with
look at, I don't understand. Got to go to Virginia. That seems very interesting. So there's no trick or treating on Halloween.
No trick or treating on Halloween in Virginia.
Zero.
Yeah, zero. Wow. None.
Those must have been the people that demanded the change from Wienermobile to Frankmobile.
I'm thinking so. Once again, a problem that didn't need to happen. Utah, it is illegal not to drink milk. Okay, got that. And I think the last one that I really loved here is Wyoming. You may not take a picture of a rabbit from January to April without an official permit.
Hey, they're just trying to create additional tax revenue. That's all.
I'm thinking, and it really screws with you when Easter keeps moving back and forth between March and April and everything else. So I just don't get it. So I want to thank Olivet Nazareth University for this fantastic analysis of the laws of our country here.
Unbelievable.
I guess we got to get some work done today too. So what do you want to talk about first here?
You know what? It's funny. We just daisy chain our conversations together. I know we just threw out the debt ceiling. I'm not sure if there's everything that's to be said about the debt ceiling has been said. It's interesting. I did see something yesterday that was interesting. Going back to 2011, they were talking about the line in the sand when they were talking about 8 days prior to that deadline in 2011. Over the next few days or within a week, the market went down something like 15 to 20% within 8 days to go. Now, obviously, we haven't seen anything like that. We have different factors involved here, but it could be the same potential outcome. We all know there's going to be a deal, but certainly we don't know the content of the deal. And even if the negotiators agree, it's still going to take 3 to 5 days to pass it. I think we're going to have some kind of government shutdown. I think there's at least a 50% chance, whether it's a day, a week, who knows, but it looks like it could happen just for pure posturing standpoint on both sides.
There's such a tight margin in both houses of Congress. The challenge that you always have is if they negotiate a deal and then it goes back to the House, you could have the hardliners on one side just say, screw you, no, we're not doing it. And that puts us into that situation where we do have a government shutdown. And I agree with you. I think that, if you look at history, that's been the game or the playbook in a lot of these cases where we do go into a government shutdown. It just causes a bunch of havoc. And, we've talked about it ad nauseum, but I think there is a chance. The markets are definitely sitting there with a hair trigger right now.
On the congressional side, the voting is so tight that we're not talking about 10 or 15 people on both sides. We're only talking about 4 or 5. And those 4 or 5 people on both sides really truly hold whether or not it's going to pass or not, and they can hold out for whatever they want. Absolutely. As somebody told me one time, why can't everybody get along in Congress? They go, Ron, do you work for free? I'm like, no, neither do they. So if they're not going to get something for their vote, why should they vote? I get that, but at the end of the day, is this really what's best for the American people? No matter what your color or independence is, it's ridiculous.
I always laughed. I always think back to the Charlie Wilson's War, and where he was talking about in there. He's talking about, I'm a Democrat in a highly conservative area. As long as people get their guns and low taxes, basically they'll keep electing me. So I get to give a lot of favors to people. Right.
He gets to say yes a lot. Good. It was a great line in that movie. Yep.
It's beautiful. So I think that's, from my perspective, that is something that's hanging out there behind the scenes a little bit. A couple of the things that I noticed this week, it was a little perplexing today looking at the GDP numbers. The expectation for GDP coming in was like 1.1%, and it came in at 1.3. The second read of GDP for Q1, which that still somewhat perplexes me because I think we're seeing a slowdown, and it may just be that Q1 was still pretty fast moving, and we haven't really seen some slowdown going into Q2 yet. But the other thing I thought was interesting is the Richmond Fed, the manufacturing index. I've been talking about this with the other manufacturing indexes in Philly and New York, and now Richmond. All of them have shown a lot of weakness in the manufacturing sector. And that, but the economy is Nero, or the GDP and the consumer are almost like Nero fiddling while Rome is burning around him at this point.
Yeah. All the key economic factors have been ticking down, trending down. It's just, quite frankly, what is the catalyst to either stabilize and go back up? Or what's the catalyst for literally the fall to fall out from underneath of it and have a precipitous drop? Because I think we could be looking at a 5 to a 15% drop.
Yeah.
I think if we make it through the summer without any catalyst, we could be up for the year. It certainly wasn't my thesis over the last 8 to 10 months.
No.
But we'll have to see what happens with the Fed. At least half of the Fed governors have come out since the last Fed meeting saying inflation's still too high. And with inflation still too high, I still think there's better than a 50% chance we get a 0.25% rate hike in June. I don't think if they don't do it, I don't think it's a pause or a pivot. I think they just might be skipping one meeting to say, let's see how things go until July. I don't know. But there will be some good economic data that comes out before that meeting. They're always data dependent. So I still think it's better than a 50% chance we could get a 0.25% hike.
Nil cash carry on Monday.
Yep.
I thought that was it was a very telling conversation that he had when he spoke. He said, he goes, I can see a 50 basis points more this year. And he said, yeah, there's a chance that we have a minor recession, but he felt that employment is so good or still going so strong that the market or the economy could still absorb a little bit of that. Which once again, I always look at that and go, okay, so what you're saying is until a whole bunch more people get fired, we can still just keep letting this thing go.
Look, it's the frog in the pot, right?
Yep.
Just if you can't do if they do a 50 or 75 hike, which won't happen, that would completely, I think, shake the markets up. But if they continue to do small 0.25 point hikes, the end is near with the hikes. There's no doubt about it. It's just a matter of when are they going to see the numbers that they want to completely pause. They're still showing with the Fed future rates possible cut in Q4 this year. We've talked about this in a few pods.
It's just not going to happen.
I don't know. I don't know where that information's coming from, especially when all the Fed governors are talking about still raising. Something catastrophic would have to happen for them to start lowering.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see how things pan out there.
And you still have, I can't see them lowering because you still have pretty high inflation, and GDP alone just told you, all right, we're still rocking along and the consumer's still spending. So why would they even think of cutting that? They might hold it for a while, but I cannot see them cutting any time during 2023, and most likely not into even mid 2024 at that point. So
I agree. Let me show a couple of charts. We'll throw it back and then we'll start talking here. I'm an amateur technician, been doing it a long time, very similar to a lot of other people. I think monitoring technicals is a great way of not only identifying trends, but identifying good buy and sell points. Obviously, nobody's smart enough to pick the top or the bottom of the market, but I think we need to see some trending. So here are two charts here. The one on the left is the S&P 500 index. The one on the right is the NASDAQ composite. So this isn't the top 100 stocks, but through ad nauseum on our last podcast, we know that the top 8 to 10 stocks in the S&P are basically responsible for about 30 to 35% of its total move. And it's very similar in the NASDAQ too. But what I wanted to show here, and what a lot of people look at, is the 50-day moving average in the 200. So the blue line is the 50. The red line is the 200. And this goes back a very long time where people that are trading to get in and out of the market, whether that's short, medium, or long term, really follow the 50-day. So if the stock price or index is above the 50-day, that's bullish, right? You got the 200-day moving average, the red line, that's the institutional line. So At the top of the market, that's when the institutions are selling. And at the bottom of the market, that's when the institutions are buying. And they're always ahead of the traders and they're always ahead of the public. What we can see here is that things are still pretty strong. But when you get something like this is called the golden cross, when the 50-day goes above the 200, and then you get a widening. When you get too much of a widening between the 50 and the 200, eventually it gets squeezed together again. We could very easily go below the 50, and I'm anticipating going below the 200-day, I don't know, in the next 30 to 60 days, which would be a pretty significant drop. I think we're going to see much more volatility on the NASDAQ side, especially those top 8 stocks where they hold so much weighting. I just really feel that whatever, it's not going to grow into space. It's eventually going to come back down to earth. So I think we're going to get some kind of a leveling out at some point. It's very possible with NVIDIA's earnings yesterday that we may have seen that blow off top where we could get some type of exhaustion in the market. And the very last thing to look at is how many of the S&P 500 stocks are trading above its 50-day moving average and how many are trading above its 200-day moving average. And I think one of the important things to really see here is the following. Only 35% of the 500 stocks are trading above its 50-day moving average. Only 43% are trading above its 200-day. So if we're up for the year, how are only 43% above its 200-day moving average? It should be 60, should be at least 50, at least above 50 at least. And that'll tell you the weightings of those top 8 to 10 stocks, showing that, hey, you know what? Its breadth across the market is still fairly weak. The 50 and the 200-day is critical. This is a carryover from last week. Everything on this slide still holds. We could talk about each of these for quite some time. For the first time in about a month and a half, I actually heard different networks on different programs talking about credit card balances. Retail sales in key areas have slowed down. Home Depot, Target, Lowe's, some of the other retailers have already shown that spending has slowed, but people are still spending. That means they're still putting it on the credit cards. At some point, they're going to be paying more in interest than they are on their principal. Who knows? But the idea is that with those credit card balances skyrocketing, at some point, that bill's got to come due and it's got to come off. And if they decide to go through bankruptcy, they're still responsible for their credit card purchases. We'll see. We're not going to go through all this. I'll flip it back to you.
Yeah.
But on the bottom there, we just had the jobless claims come out this morning. It was hot. It wasn't as high as they were expecting, which means people aren't losing their jobs as much and there's not as many job openings. So it's interesting. All those tailwinds on the bottom, that's why I'm still pretty confident about the Fed raising rates at least a quarter of a point in June. And if not in June, definitely in July, if all the numbers hold true and remain still hot.
Totally agree. Yeah, I see it exactly the same way. And like I said, it's until we start seeing layoffs. And like I said, all of this is falling into line with exactly what I've heard a couple of the Fed governors say. And they look at their second mandate, which is employment. And if employment's still strong, they feel like they've got the ability to keep trying to fight inflation. It's interesting to see what kind of out of the debt ceiling deal, if there's going to be any kind of spending cuts that end up happening, which could potentially stop so much money flowing into the economy from the government, which right now I think the Fed and the government are fighting side by side, basically. From that perspective.
I don't know if you're a 60 Minutes watcher. They always have at least one good, if not two good stories every week. Was it last weekend or the week before? They had a whole segment, and people go to YouTube and watch the segment again on the price gouging on the defense budget. And they had the former chief negotiator. I can't remember whether he was there 15, 20 or 30 years, but he was the most hated man in the Pentagon because he held many of the contractors' feet to the fire, and he's been gone. And now he came out and said it's still going on. And they were talking about Because the way the contractors make their money, and I'm not going to mention any names, who all the big ones are on the defense side. It's not the initial winning of the contract where they make their money. They make their money on service and parts for 15, 20 years on the big fighter jets and the defense systems. And they were talking about if we could just eliminate waste and price gouging, the spending right there would pull our debt down immediately.
Yeah.
So, and again, that's just one aspect of it. Forget about all the other egregious
the other part,
spending.
Yeah, the other part I was listening to, I was watching Mike McCall, Congressman McCall, who's a former Green Beret, and he's on that appropriations committee. And he was talking about the challenge that we have is during the 1990s, we went from a whole bunch of contractors down to a ton of consolidation.
Yes.
So now there's just a few of them. And there's some critical things. I know on the Apache helicopters, gunships, there's one little part, there's one little valve that can take one of these things out if it's broken. And there's only one manufacturer in our country that actually makes that one little part. So they charge a fortune for that one part. And the other part that what the point he made too, I thought was a very valid point, is he said the Defense Department is always, pushing for the new, wonderful, coolest thing that's out there. And they keep going to the point where they're saying, oh, okay, we want you guys to focus on this. And then all of a sudden they turn around and, okay, we need all these parts and stuff like that. So we need you to fire up those production lines again. And he's like, that's not easy to do. You don't just restart a production line that you've closed down.
And I know some people in manufacturing and fabrication, and some of the things they've told me, those small parts, the tubes, the pipes, the hoses, all that other stuff, you could hire a local regional company to fabricate that stuff at a fraction of the cost than going to the manufacturer. It's car parts. You can either get a manufacturer part or you can get an aftermarket part. Yep. Now, if you get an aftermarket part, then immediately the manufacturer says your warranty is voided if you use it. It could be just as good, if not better, but the fact is you got to pay the VIG. Yeah. It's insane. This is across the board, not just in government spending, but certainly it's been egregious for decades.
Well, yeah, and not just in defense spending, but across the board in government spending. They get these down to such tight contracts, and then basically that company's a made man for the rest of their lives.
They're locked in
at that point. Yeah, they're so good. Yeah. Well, that's a little scary. Hopefully we've got some people, like I said, I think the good part is there's a whole bunch of people, and it's really interesting to me. We've gotten a whole bunch of people elected into office that are military again, and they know where the bones are buried in a lot of cases. And
the difference is, are they getting paid off and their campaigns are getting funded?
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? I always hate the part when you have somebody that went in, was not making a whole lot of money, and comes out of Congress as a multi-millionaire. Something's wrong there.
And it wasn't just from a book deal. I'm sorry.
Absolutely not. And it wasn't from their $100,000 salary that they get paid. They've certainly made money somehow.
I think the oversight committee are blind in both eyes.
I totally agree. Do you have anything else that you want to cover today?
I think we covered everything. I think going into the holiday weekend, things will slow up a little bit. Yep. I want to wish everybody a little bit of downtime this weekend and looking forward to the summer travel. I know that a lot of people are beefing up their trips and it should be interesting. But at the end of earnings season here, approaching the debt ceiling, I think that we'll get some volatility, but I think it'll be quiet here over the next week. Yeah. We'll have to see how things.
You got a lot of graduations going on and things like that. So I think people are focused in other areas. Our next show will be literally the day before the debt ceiling deadline that the Treasury Secretary has said. So it's going to be interesting to hear what happens over the next 5 to 7 days.
And for what I understand, a good chunk of the tax revenue due is June 15th. It's amazing how much you learn about this stuff, right? Yeah. Not only June 15th, but June 30th too. So they're looking at what that tax revenue, but they already said there's a deficit. Yeah. So obviously they could go to June 15th, but I understand what Janet Yellen is doing. She's trying to say, don't wait till the end, get it done now. Yeah, I get it. Every Treasury Secretary has done this.
Please don't make us have to do a shell game and move things around at this point.
I actually think, and we talked about this last time, the worst thing that can happen, I truly believe, besides defaulting, which won't happen, obviously a government shutdown is probably the worst thing that'll happen. But the next worst thing would be some kind of a continuing resolution where they kick it towards the end of this year and the beginning of next year, and we got to go through it again in a shorter period of time. We're going to have to do it again anyway in the next couple of years, but I just think that's a horrible thing.
And kicking it down the road into a election year, presidential election year, and a major election year for the Senate. Nothing would get done next year. So they need to fix the problem this year and hopefully get it to where they can get it over another couple of years before we're back to the wire again.
And if people think that politics has become a blood sport today, 2024 is going to be a hemorrhaging year. No doubt about it. It's going to be interesting.
It's interesting. You talk about blood sport in Congress and that it's that way. I've been reading The President and the Freedom Fighter by Brian Kilmeade. It's about Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. And they were talking about Congressman Sumter, or I think Senator Sumter, during 1859, where he was a big slavery abolitionist, and one of the congressmen came over into the Senate chamber and almost beat him to death with a walking stick. So yes, we have blood sport in politics, but not that bad.
Not yet.
Yes. All right, guys. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining us on the show. Ron, thanks for, as always, coming up with some great charts and graphs.
Yeah. I want to wish everybody a great holiday weekend. We will talk soon. Give us your feedback. We're always looking to improve the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our veterans out there, thank you for your service. We will be thinking about you this weekend, and we'll see you back here next time.